there's three options for the way that this can go down from here.
Let's go back in time to the formation of Russia.
That's treason. There will be no more Ukraine. You will look at a map and it will not be there. There are people in America starving. There are people in America homeless. There are people in America that need money. Hey, welcome back to Common Mansplaining. Welcome back to the show. For those of you guys, if this is your first time, welcome to the show. I'm Eddie, that's Christian. And today, we've got a lively one. We're going to talk about the face-off between Trump and Zelensky and the situation in Ukraine, which of course has come to a head, and all that has led up to it. So why don't we start off there? We have a resident historian with us. Christian, why don't you tell us a little bit about why we're in this situation to begin with?
All right. So let's go back in time to the formation of Russia itself as a nation. The Rus were kind of settled. They were Slavic tribes, but there were some Nordic Vikings that came through, and they were looking for a passage to the Black Sea. Going down the Volga River, which goes through Kiev, goes through Ukraine. They found that there's a huge cataract about around Kiev, so they couldn't really do it. So essentially, they ended up living in Russia rather than setting up a trade. They wanted black pepper, which is what everybody wanted. It's why America was discovered, was because of black pepper prices. Anyway, Kiev, in a long time, the Russian Empire, right, that we know about it classically, was headquartered in Kiev, not Moscow, not in St. Petersburg. That's where the emperors were. Gradually, the power base moved to Moscow, 19th century, early 20th century to St. Petersburg. So Russia and Ukraine have very intertwined histories as far as they encountered the Rus or the Vikings is really what made them have a relationship with Europe and become a little bit more European. And so they feel a lot like that really Ukraine is part of Russia. And so during the USSR, Russia put a lot of investment into Ukraine. We know about Chernobyl, right, which was a disaster, but that type of infrastructure, expensive nuclear power plants, things like that they put in because they just saw Ukraine as part of Russia. Now, fast forward to the end of the Cold War, right, which Russia lost. This was during the first Bush administration. He was negotiating the drawdown. James Baker, Republican administration. So Russia agreed, right, with the fall of the Berlin Wall, to really make that real, to withdraw 450,000 Red Army troops from Germany so that Germany could unify and become a NATO nation. And they made an agreement. Well, one thing they asked James Baker was that NATO would not move any further east. James Baker said, we will not move 1 inch east. So this is the first sort of commitment made by them. So fast forward then to 1997. Who is president? Bill Clinton. As a Democrat, he doesn't want to feel beholden to any kind of Republican deal made by Republicans. Even though James Baker, everybody's widely seen as a master of
those darn Republicans always messing stuff up.
Right? So he wants his international legacy to be expanding NATO because that sounds more sexy. And so he starts adding Poland. Russia's like, whoa, what's going on? So we get Poland, Turkey, Bulgaria,
Lithuania,
Romania.
Chechnya, hell yeah.
Now, Estonia, Lithuania, Latvia. The only ones in Europe that are not in NATO are Austria, Switzerland, Croatia, Serbia, and Ukraine. Everybody else has come in. So Russia has seen us breaking our word, right? And especially the Democrats have seen, right, they're globalists. Nobody respects the UN militarily, but NATO gets respect, right? So they want to expand NATO. What were you going to say?
Well, I was just going to say I should point out that they've seen us break it over and over again too. Like this isn't like it happened just once and we added a bunch of stuff and then stopped again. It was like we added and then we added and then we added and then we added and then we added. It was like 5 or 6 times or something where we are like adding different little stints. To be fair, some of this takes different amounts of time to get the ball rolling, but like just so people have a good context, it's not like we just did this a single time.
Yeah, absolutely. Finland, things right on their border. And now with Ukraine, it's one thing for an ex-republic like Czechoslovakia or Hungary to start feeling their independence, or even Poland, Germany, and break away from Russia. Ukraine has always felt, even in the deep, long history, really, really intertwined. But they have their own language, but it's really close to Russian. So they have a lot of cultural things, and Russia has invested heavily in that. The push to which they're even now trying to push to make Ukraine part of NATO, so that they would really have the ultimate
Right.
guarantee. So that's the sort of history I want people to sort of appreciate. And also under Clinton, the U.S. also at the same time withdrew from a couple of nuclear weapons treaties that Russia very much wanted to intermediate
Right.
intercontinental ballistic missiles, and then we've put weapons in Poland, in Romania, in Bulgaria that
Right.
are nuclear capable. So anyway, there's sort of been some unevenness in the U.S.'s
Absolutely.
favor. The other thing, so Ukraine was a nuclear power, but Ukraine wanted to become an independent. They didn't want to just be part of Russia. So part of the thing was we didn't want to have Ukraine entering the world stage, or at least the Democrats, as a full nuclear power, equal in prestige in the UN to France,
Right.
England, America, China, Russia. So they negotiated with Ukraine to give up
Right.
all of their nuclear weapons and and a promise not to develop future nuclear. That's a pretty big thing to ask of Ukraine. What was their guarantee?
Yeah. So yeah, we were supposed to look out for them.
Yeah, the border integrity. We said we'll make sure you have border integrity if you just give up these nuclear missiles. That all went the way of the dodo under Obama, right?
Now, I got a question for
Sure.
you. One of the because I've
Sure.
when I research history, it comes out to be about what you just said.
Yeah.
Now, one thing that I am met with occasionally as resistance is they'll say that when Baker said "not 1 inch east," that the line I keep getting fed is like, well, that was kind of unofficial, right? Like he wasn't an official statement.
Yeah, you're right. Any treaty was not ratified by the Congress. Yeah, so Clinton didn't do anything illegal. Right? We're not talking about
Right.
anything illegal, but it was douchey. I'm talking about this from the perspective of the Russians, right? I'm not talking about that there wasn't a legal ground for him to do this. He had the opportunity. You're saying, well, but gentlemen's agreement, if we're going to trust things that have been said and taken on good faith,
Right.
Clinton
He still felt
he was still not. I would say Clinton wasn't acting in good faith, but he didn't have anything legally stopping him, right?
That's fair.
Which is sort of expanding globalism. So under Obama, then Russia went in and took over the Crimean Peninsula and started the first incursion in the Donbass, right? Which they said, "Oh, just Russia. This is Russian speakers only live here." And Obama was not willing to step up militarily and guarantee border integrity, right?
No,
and our same arguments like Ukraine's a long ways away. When Russia seems like NATO wants to bring Ukraine in to NATO.
Yeah, maybe. So I'm a couple of things to push back on. One is
Sure.
that I don't think that we ever actually wanted to bring them into NATO.
Okay.
I don't know if that's true or not, but it doesn't seem like our actions aren't consistent with that. One thing I'll say is that
they campaigned for it. They opened Zelensky.
Oh yeah. No, don't get me wrong.
That's what
Ukraine really wants to be in NATO. Mm-hmm. I don't think we want them in NATO. I think we would prefer to have that land buffer zone, that kind of like this demilitarized zone where we don't have to worry about any kind of direct border with Russia. From a strategic point of view, that makes sense. But also, Ukraine really hasn't to this point had anything to offer us. Right now, of course, we've since discovered that they've got a lot of rare earth elements and a lot of gas and stuff that we can use, some natural gas and stuff. So then now the terrain may be shifting. One other thing I would add is that by all measures that I can research effectively, we essentially created a coup in Ukraine in 2014. So that's definitely
spicy. That's spicy.
Yeah, that is spicy, but it's safe enough. Like the footprints of CIA are all over the place. Like we definitely had a lot of like propaganda and advertisement that we were pushing toward the change in leadership. Zelensky.
Let's be clear here. Ukraine after the Cold War usually had leaders that were very close to Moscow and Russia leadership. And so this is the first time they were going to have a president who was more friendly to the West and not to Moscow.
Right, and at our behest, because otherwise, of their own volition, they almost certainly would not have. Zelensky wouldn't be the guy. He just wouldn't. The other guy was much more. I forget his name entirely, and I don't think I could pronounce it even when I had it. So,
Yushkovich. Let me Google it really quick.
Yeah, you're right. It's like it begins with a Y. It's one of those classic Russian type names. But the other thing, too, and that people often forget, is that the Donbass region, while remaining inside the Ukrainian border, is predominantly ethnic Russian, right? And these guys essentially have closer ties to Russia than they do to Ukraine, believe it or not, and are facing considerable political persecution within Ukraine by Ukraine prior to the invasion in 2022.
Yeah.
And so a lot of what happened leading up to this, now don't get me wrong, because I don't want to be confused as saying that Putin has a right to invade, because I don't think he does. I don't want people. One of the fastest things I see is like the moment a Republican says, we had some part to play, or that Ukraine had some part to play. They're like, "Why you're such a Putin stooge?" And like, "Where are you getting your paychecks from Putin?" It's like, oh boy, I wish, right? Like, I wish you would send me some money. Now, I'm not a Putin fan.
Yeah,
I never will be.
We got to be dispassionate about this. Yeah,
right. But it's important to know that this was not, as the media has spun, an unprovoked invasion. What it was provoked by us many, many times over the course of history. And then in 2014, we provoked it almost directly by like setting up a coup to tear a nation away from them. And then more recently, Ukraine has literally been going in and persecuting a ethnic group of Russians who specifically asked Moscow for protection, right? And so when Putin sent his men in, again, not my style, not what I would have done in his shoes, but when he sent it in, it really wasn't technically at that point an invasion. It was a protective force that was designed to protect the people who had requested his protection.
Right.
Now, of course, he used that as an excuse to take it all the way on the other side of the map.
As things with Russia, you have to take things with a grain of salt. And let's see through his spin, because he had some reasons which we're trying to acknowledge here.
Right.
He built those up, and he added a lot of bullcrap propaganda on that for his own people to justify, sending people to their deaths, right, and its expenses. And so he created a lot of sort of cultural resentment to make people willing to hate and kill Ukrainians, which is not something that's natural, right? Because their history, they feel Ukraine is very similar to them. And so it's not a sort of attacking the other kind of thing like in so many of our wars are. So there was some propaganda and some things, and that's what was played here in the States. When we see that propaganda, we're just like, oh my gosh, right?
Right.
There's no right. This is just an evil naked ambition, and
you would think
dark film.
You would think he's the new Hitler if you'd like just watched our media stations. You'd be like, "What?"
Well, based on some of his propaganda.
Sure, and not only that though, but we've taken it. Not only has he had his own set of propaganda, we've added our own on top of it to like just over the top. Like we've gotten to the point. One of the things that I keep hearing over and over again is, well, after he takes Ukraine, he's going to take Poland, and then Finland, and then the Baltic states, and I'm like, what? Never has Putin said this. Never has he implied it. Never. He's even specifically refuted it, like maybe 100 times. Like there's nothing to suggest that he would actually attack NATO proper after taking Ukraine.
Well,
like
but he has sort of learned that he's sort of somewhat interested in Moldova, which is on the western side of Ukraine, and is not part of NATO.
Oh yeah, don't get me wrong. I don't deny that he may even want to do all those things.
Yeah.
Right, like in the back of the recesses of his mind, he may want to regain like the former might of the USSR and like the glory and whatever. Never in a million years is he going to trigger Article 5. He's not going to start a war with like a hot war with America, UK, France, Germany. Like no way. Like he's far too intelligent for that. That's the big thing that I think was missing, that we put in our propaganda from like day one, we tried to make him out to be like some kind of crazy guy. We tried to make him out to be like this egomaniacal Hitlerian overlord who's just going to like start annexing the rest of the world like Pac-Man. And the truth is, while he may be, egomaniacal, he's very calculating. He's very intelligent and he's very measured. And he doesn't do these rash kind of like, I'm just going to start taking things over. Like, that's not his style. Never was.
I wholeheartedly agree that the West does not understand Putin and can either underestimate his cunning, but his ruthlessness, right? Why they see him the bad guy, that he's willing to send, and lose to injury, death, wounding,
disease,
500,000 Russian soldiers or more, and endure a loss of life that for us is unacceptable. Right? We're talking about more soldiers, more casualties than the U.S. suffered in World War II.
Right.
And he's very cavalier about it. And that's something that we just can't get our minds onto. It's a very different willingness to sacrifice things that are acceptable that would be unacceptable to us. And
they have a very different style of warfare too. And part of the problem is because their technology isn't where ours is, right? So like America's been able to hide behind that shield of technology to a large extent. A lot of our conflicts where we don't have to get so directly involved, right? Like we haven't had to have like an aerial dogfight in a long time. We haven't had to have like boots on the ground type of like action where we send large Marine expeditionary forces across territory to capture and hold. And like, that's just not what America has to do anymore. All we have to do is send a few F-22s and 18s and then, just like carpet the entire area. And then, by that point, we've either usually accomplished a surrender or by the time we take it over, there really isn't any resistance left. But Russia doesn't have that luxury. Unfortunately, between Ukraine and Russia, that's how they have to do it, is this huge, like attritionary, like send tons of tanks, expect that most of them will die. And they're like, oh, well, if some of them get through, which is to us, that's grotesque because we're like, why would anybody do that? But they basically have to because they don't have our technological advancements. They don't have the ballistic shield that we've got. So it's unfortunate for them.
This is good that you bring up armaments. And I want to talk about this before we get to Zelensky and the developments this week, which we need to comment. When a country joins NATO, one of the things that they agree to is NATO's standard of arms. Right? We have a shared sort of standard of arms. Now, some countries will develop their own tanks, a couple other things, but they will buy arms from Northrop Grumman, from U.S. suppliers, or from us, and that standard, and not from Russia, right? And so Ukraine made a lot of weapons for a lot of factories for Russian military were made in Ukraine. So what happens with that? All of a sudden, they're going to lose their biggest supplier of military goods. All that change over, and they're going to start making.
It's a really good point.
So there's all kinds of stuff that really made it a security risk to a level that we didn't appreciate. And the world media, not just the U.S. media, the world media has been very much in favor of Ukraine. And so for the last 2 years, I was talked into it. The Biden administration, right, with their deep ties, we're not really sure how legit they were. Maybe corrupt, but they had strong ties to Ukraine. We're willing to send money and weapons to a very large scale to Ukraine, to a level that nobody else really needed to send any more money. We were sending it.
Right.
I mean,
that was part of the problem.
Everybody would they'd send some token, tanks and some things there. But all the money they needed to prosecute the war came from us.
Right. It was like Britain would send 18 tanks and France would send 5 and we'd send 115. It's like, what? Well, like nothing even close, They'd send them $1 billion, send them or $300 million, and we'd send $40 billion in our first payment. And it's like, we appreciate the support. Quite frankly, their opposition worked. Our support, Russia was not able to just run over their defense. They were able to find Stinger missiles, Anyway, we don't. So it made a difference, and that was being spun to us. That this was possibly something that could win. That they could inflict so much loss on Russia's forces and military that Russia would be compelled to stop. Now Russia is compelled to negotiate, which is what
Trump feels like that Putin wants peace. The terms are not going to be what Zelensky has been asking for, but it is possible. And he thinks, I think the U.S. position and Trump's position, this current administration, not Biden administration, which was, we will fund you until you drive the Russians back home. Our current thing is, we don't want to start World War III.
I just want to have it said for the record, so that I encourage everyone to go like on this channel back 3 years to see what I was saying about the war back then, because I called it from day one. I was never taken in by this stupid idea of Biden's. From day one, I said, this is what's going to happen. We're going to try to bleed Putin dry. And by the way, even then there was a risk, right? Like even then, doing it this way risked world war. Doing it this way risked nuclear conflict, even back then. Now, we seem to have beaten the odds, right? I don't know exactly what the percentage of that risk was. At one point, I think Max Tegmark put it at like 25%, which is very, very high. Yeah. Even if it was only like 5%, that was a risk I wasn't willing to make. But suppose it was like 0 or, negligible. Even so, I'm like, all this is going to do is lose slowly, right? We were never going to win this way. The only way for America to ever have created a victory in Ukraine's behalf was for us to fight directly. That was the only way we ever could have done it.
The Ukrainians themselves are not willing to commit their whole country to total war, which is why Zelensky now is the forced consequence. It's a really bad-looking optics of they're essentially abducting military-age males from public and compelling them to join the military. Yeah, men and women. But,
and kids.
Yeah. And people have been leaving the country.
Yep.
That are Ukrainians that fired up about Russian rule that they're willing to die for it? They're not really. And that's when you support an enemy who is like, it's not the end of the world if Russia takes over or whatever. It'll be, we don't want it, but it's whatever. I'm not willing to die for it. I'm going to go move to Britain or the U.S. or whatever.
Yeah, whatever.
So if they're not committed to total war, yes, we can bleed Russia. So that leads us to this week.
Indeed. So let me, I'll share my screen real quick. I just want to show you guys a couple of things about what happened in this meeting. I'll show you, first of all, what Zelensky did, which was kind of a cheap trick. And then I'll show you afterwards what transpired after that cheap trick was. So this is Zelensky, and he's showing him pictures. Literally pictures. These are just so people understand, because it's hard to see. These are pictures of like prisoners of war being like, emaciated or people with like kids with their heads blown off and stuff like this. Is very, very grotesque, very, very nasty stuff, because he's trying to like literally, this is a cheap shot. This is in the middle of the Oval Office. He is trying to like pull on everyone's hearts to try to like push us emotionally into a decision that he knows doesn't make any sense for America anymore. And so that was the beginning of the meeting. And then, of course, the meeting very quickly spiraled downhill. And I'll show you what transpired after that. So after he's like basically begging for everyone to get involved and for more stuff and would not commit to any peace, then, he hasn't said thank you this entire time. And then Vance gets involved.
What kind of diplomacy, JD, you are speaking about? What do you mean?
I'm talking about the kind of diplomacy that's going to end the destruction of your country.
Yes, but if you
Mr. President, with respect, I think it's disrespectful for you to come into the Oval Office and try to litigate this in front of the American media. Right now, you guys are going around and forcing conscripts to the front lines because you have manpower problems. You should be thanking the president for trying to bring an end to this conflict.
Have you ever been to Ukraine that you say what problems we have?
I have been to.
Count once.
I've actually watched and seen the stories, and I know what happens is you bring them on a propaganda tour, Mr. President. Do you disagree that you've had problems bringing people into your military? And do you think that it's respectful to come to the Oval Office of the United States of America and attack the administration that is trying to prevent the destruction of your country?
A lot of questions. Let's start from the beginning.
Sure.
First of all, during the war, everybody has problems, even you, but you have nice ocean and don't feel now, but you will feel it in the future. God bless.
You don't know that.
God bless. God bless. You will not have a war.
Don't tell us what we're going to feel. We're trying to solve a problem. Don't tell us what we're going to feel.
I'm not telling you.
Because
I'm
you're in no
answering on
position
this
to
question.
dictate that.
That's
Remember
exactly what
this.
you're doing.
You're in no position to dictate what we're going to feel. We're going to feel very good.
You will feel influenced.
We're going to feel very
I'm
good and
telling
very
you,
strong.
You will feel influenced.
You're right now not in a very good position. You've allowed yourself to be in a very bad position, and he happens to be right about it.
From the very beginning of the war.
You're not in a good position. You don't have the cards right.
So there you see it. And Trump, I have to say, I really applaud J.D. Vance and Trump for telling it like it is, because this is something that's forgotten about in today's world, because it's become so taboo for anyone to ever aggress on anybody else.
Have conflict openly on camera.
And I understand that, and I appreciate that, and I'm actually happy to live in that world, right? Like, don't get me wrong, like I appreciate this blanket of protection. But that having been said, there's a very key point that everyone seems to have forgotten about, and that is, if you're losing, you have to make some concessions, right? If you cannot win, regardless of whether you're supposed to be in that situation or not. Like we saw this situation in Israel and Gaza. Again, there's a situation where Gaza literally can't win, and yet want the other party to make all of the concessions, right? Here, Ukraine can't win, and somehow wants Putin to just like, oh, I'll just give all the land back. You can have Crimea too. You can have everything. You know what? We're really sorry for ever having that's just delusional. You're just delusional when you get yourself into a situation. And I'm so glad that Trump said, look, you just don't have the cards, buddy. When we go into this negotiation, if you were winning, maybe we could say something. Maybe we could say, hey, the tide is turning. You better cut your losses before it's too late. But we can't do that. Right now, Russia's kicking their butt. And always has been. And if we continue this escapade, what I wanted to say today is there's three options for the way that this can go down from here. Option number one is we can keep doing what we're doing. We can just bleed both of them, those countries, dry until eventually Ukraine is gone. And that's what will happen. Ukraine will be no more. Russia will be weakened, yes, but Ukraine will be gone. Like, there will be no more Ukraine. You will look at a map and it will not be there. Option number two is we get in a hot war with Russia. We beat Russia off because it will take America's might and power to do so. And then option number three is you surrender. You say, look, we're in bad shape. Let's sue for whatever conditions we can acquire right now. And that's what Trump was trying to make happen, was option number three, which is by far the best option. It was always the best option. There is no magical fourth option where Russia surrenders all of its gained territory. You guys are delusional if you think that.
There's also another bad fourth option. Well, we don't get involved, but Europe does. Europe finally decides to step in. Keir Starmer hosted Zelensky and made a big show of feting him all this stuff, but then wrote him a check for 100th of what the U.S. would write him a check for. Right. And so it's like, I'm treated really well, and I got this. Oh, okay. So, I mean, Europe has lived under our bubble. This is a European security issue. If they want to persecute it outside of NATO, that is their sovereign nation. But they should know that it's not going to invoke Article 5 of NATO, at least as far as we're concerned, if they keep this up. So I saw a really bad analogy I wanted to run by you. And see your reaction to this. Somebody was like, the reaction is like, my house is on fire, and I call my neighbor or my neighbor to call 911, and he says, all right, give me half of your stuff, or I won't call 911.
Oh
right?
My God!
And I heard that, and all right. So what would be your approach to that? Yeah.
Let me fix this analogy so that it's more apt, so that it's accurate, right? Mm-hmm. The accurate analogy is your house is on fire. I have been using my little piddly garden hose to try to put it out for the last 3 years. And the house continues to burn more and more and more. Now, I could sell my house, take all of the money that I get from my house to go buy a sufficient hose to put out that fire. Or I could just say, why did you light your house on fire in the first place? That's the accurate analogy. Now, the problem is people forget that, number one, they didn't have to get into this conflict in the first place. People forget that there was a peace deal on the table before any Russian invasion. A peace deal, furthermore, that Zelensky had already signed. I want to let that sink in for a second. There's a peace deal on the table between Russia and Ukraine that Zelensky had already signed. And we convinced him not to do it.
Well, Biden.
Well, maybe not even Biden, maybe Blinken or something. I don't know. I don't know who exactly it was that said not to do it, but either way, it probably came down from Biden, right? Like it came through but the fact that we told him not to do it is ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous. But that having been said, there was no reason for him not to just go through with that peace deal. All it asked for was Russia wanted them to release claim on Crimea, which Russia's had for the last 10 years or something like that. It asked for that Russia to be able to build Nord Stream 2 pipeline, and then it asked for them not to join NATO. That was the only three things it asked for. Now, ask yourself, in retrospect, obviously hindsight's 2020, is the deal they're going to get today better or worse than that one?
Worse.
Obviously worse. And the longer they wait, the more they draw this thing out, the more their house is going to burn down, and the worse the deal is going to get. They may get to a point where they can't save their house anymore, where the structural integrity is just too weak.
I think maybe Europe learned the wrong lesson from Neville Chamberlain, but they're terrified of just appeasing Putin. That they feel like even standing up, even though it's worse, that it was still morally right to show Putin that anything he wants to achieve can't be achieved easily and will come at a dear cost. It did sort of expose Russia's military as being not as feared as it would before. One of the big things, what somebody said,
maybe
to understand Russia's economy, population, and size in the world now, not the former USSR when they could exploit all these countries, but now they're about the equivalent of Spain.
Well, so I disagree, and here's why.
Okay.
There are two huge reasons. One, their nuclear arsenal.
Yeah.
Right? People seem to forget that while they haven't used them yet, Russia has the largest nuclear arsenal in the world. Mm-hmm. It's bigger than ours. Right? People forget that. People seem to think that because Russia didn't perform as well as they could have, and that's the other thing too, is Russia really hasn't been fighting this war, I think. Right? They've only really pulled out all the stops in one or two engagements. Like that one day where they shot all their a lot of their Kim Jong missiles out and all their hypersonics and hit 13 out of 13 targets or whatever. That was Russia really fighting. Right? I think right now the problem is, and this is where we're having trouble understanding it, is like you mentioned earlier. The thing is, Putin doesn't care about people. He cares about his stockpiles, his aircraft, his tanks, his stuff, his infrastructure. He cares about that more than he does people, right? So he would much rather lose 800,000 guys than lose 3 of his jets. Because there've been many battles individually where he could have sent air support and performed far better, but at the risk of losing 1 or 2 jets. And so he just doesn't do it because he just doesn't care about the people. He just cares about, which one shows you how ruthless he is. And 2, it shows you that we haven't actually encountered Russia proper. If we actually got into this war full scale, there would be some stops, there would be some surprises that we would not be ready for, right? Yeah, I think we'd win, right? I don't think Russia can overmatch America. I don't even think it can overmatch all of Europe. But all of a sudden, it would get real fast. It would all of a sudden, tactical nukes would come out. All of a sudden, all the hypersonics would start getting fired. And then there would be a lot of damage. A lot of damage before we settled this thing. And then when the dust cleared, we'd be worse off for it. The whole world would be worse off for it. And people think just because he hasn't really shown us that he can just run over Ukraine, that's because he's not really trying to. I really don't think that he wants to be Lord of Ashes, right? I think he probably could have glassed Ukraine. Sure. I think he could have. I don't think that's what he wants. I think what he wants is Ukraine, right? But what good is Ukraine if you glass it? He wants that land to be his. He wants to use those rare earth elements. He wants those natural gas. If he blows everything up, he doesn't get to actually have Ukraine. He doesn't get, that's not a toy he gets to keep and take home. So I think that that's a dangerous analogy when people start acting like because Russia didn't like go all out that they can't. I think that's very, very dangerous. It's a very dangerous thought.
Okay. And I agree with you. All excellent points. So the one thing, right, people on the left who are feeling compassionate towards the underdog, towards Ukraine right now, feel like us negotiating where we get some compensation, right, in the form of a rare earth mineral agreement interest, as compensation for the $130 billion we've already sent over, though, as well as any other type of stuff we give them to rebuild, any type of Marshall Plan kind of stuff.
Yep.
Once the war is over, that we have this agreement in place. That negotiating it now, when they're in this place, is not exactly a fair negotiation. That we're taking advantage of them. I think, right, what Marco Rubio has said, right, which I tend to agree with, was that this was a way for us to have an ongoing relationship that gave a type of security guarantee.
Absolutely.
That fell short of an Article 5 or a hard red line. Considering the treasure we have committed, just gifted to Ukraine, is not an unfair consideration. Zelensky seemed to ask like, we were asking like, well, what do you want, the fillings out of my freaking teeth? Like, no, like I don't think your rare earth minerals, we're not saying like strip all of your cities of gold. We're saying develop some lands that aren't there right now, and we'll have a relationship with you. All right, go on.
So that's one of the things that's come up over the last day. I want to show you this. This is something that I didn't know about before that disastrous meeting in the Oval Office, but it's since come to my attention. I don't know, and I suspect that Trump knew about this, and which is why maybe perhaps one of the reasons why that meeting didn't go so well. Check this out. So apparently, Starmer has a mineral guarantee from Ukraine. Apparently, the deal that they signed back in January includes a rare earth mineral guarantee. Yeah. So it says right here, under their energy and climate section of this guarantee, the UK and Ukraine agreed to support the development of Ukrainian critical minerals strategy and necessary regulatory structures required to support the maximization of benefits from Ukraine's natural resources. And if you guys think that UK isn't getting some of that maximum benefit, you're crazy, through the possible establishment of a joint working group. So when I saw that, I'm like, now it's all starting to come into focus, right? Now all of a sudden, everything's starting to make sense. So literally this whole time, Trump has been asking for this, and I feel like Europe is almost going behind our backs and striking the same deal that was Trump's idea from the get-go. And meanwhile, they're at the same time throwing their weight propaganda-wise and like media-wise behind our left wing, who is deliberately sabotaging those efforts.
I have heard that rumor. What any evidence yet about the Obama foreign policy group? No. The rumor is that the Obama foreign policy group of Susan Rice, Newland, Vidman, and who was the previous? You mentioned him before. The previous Secretary of State, Blinken, have been counseling Zelensky not to take Trump's offers, things like this. Now, Susan Rice has officially on the record denied it, but that doesn't mean, okay.
Immediately before the meeting in the Oval Office, Zelensky met with many of the Democrats.
Is that for sure? Now, I've heard
that is for sure. It's right here in black and white. I'll show you. Okay. Boom. So this is right before the Oval Office. He met with what is his name? Chris Murphy. It says, boom, okay. He even tweeted this out. Just finished a meeting with President Zelensky here in Washington. He confirmed that the Ukrainian people will not support a fake peace agreement where Putin gets everything he wants and there are no security arrangements for Ukraine. So literally, right before this took place, they torpedoed that deal. They literally told him, don't take this deal with Trump. Because if you do, Trump's not going to give you anything. Like literally, that's treason. That's sedition right there. That is absolutely
Congress 100%
does not
have the right
illegal
to negotiate that kind of stuff.
What the hell is going on?
The president has the constitutional authority in place to do that. But
he is the ambassador in chief. I cannot believe
this. This is deep state.
That's
so. Yeah,
insane.
This is. They say Susan Rice has officially saying that she has not. Well,
maybe She personally didn't, That's the thing, though, is Obama's, you're right, like Obama.
I think they've talked off the record.
Absolutely.
So or not on the record.
Or sent somebody in their place as a proxy, right? Like that's what Obama's been doing, has been leading by proxy for the last several years. But that is unbelievable. When you go in and you specifically torpedo a presidential ambassadorial deal right before it happens, you should be investigated. You should be thrown in jail for that.
So coming up, you talked about your list of choices. So the Trump administration, the U.S. has two choices. One of them is Trump says Zelensky can come back when he wants peace, and that he wants to do a deal and have peace. The other one is to wash their hands.
Yep.
Right. And then the third one is to continue the grants
of just give away all the money in the world.
Well, that's what Zelensky is hoping for.
Sure.
And has been led to expect that there are people in America that want to continue to do that. They don't happen to be in power right now, but they've led him to believe that that's a possibility for him. So what do you think it would take? Right now, Trump is being patient and seeing if Zelensky wants peace. What do you think it would take to get to, we wash our hands, say, hey, it's your country, your sovereignty. You fight for it, you prosecute it, you negotiate it.
Yeah, that's a good question. What the magic, I don't know what Trump's magic red line is. I will say that I think he's at it, right? I think he's at the point where he's told Zelensky what he wants. Once again, Zelensky doesn't have the cards to really negotiate for anything else. So that's where Zelensky's at. So I feel like Trump's like, look, this is it. Take it or leave it. If you want peace, we're here for you. And if you don't, and this is something, again, a couple of things that I want to point out. Number one, when you give away money to somebody over and over and over again for no reason, this is exactly what happens, right? So for all those of you who are out there who love entitlements like welfare, Social Security, stuff like that, this is what happens. It gets to the point where people feel entitled to them. They feel like, what, you're not going to keep putting money in my hand for no reason? What?
Well,
what do you
mean?
They
didn't work on building any other means of creating money and to support them. They relied 100% on gifts.
Right. And that's insane. When you get to that point, when someone's just got their pockets turned out and their hands out and they're just begging for more and they think that it's forthcoming, you're already in a dangerous place. And that's one of the things that Trump said in that meeting that I agree completely with is attitudes have to change. People have to get to the point where they don't think that they can get something for nothing. When they get in that mind frame, that's what kills international diplomacy. It literally ends it when both sides get to the point where they think that the other person should just give away for free. That's when you run out of places to go in the deal. And then the other thing that I need to note is that if you are doing well, and we've said this on the channel many times, if you're doing well, if you're having a great day, if you're flush in your bank account and you've got plenty of money and your friend comes over and says, hey, can I borrow 20? No problem. America is not doing well. We are $36 trillion in debt. We are not at that place where we can just throw money at somebody else. It doesn't matter how dire their straits are. Our straits are dire. There are people in America starving. There are people in America homeless. There are people in America that need money. One day, we get all of our mess taken care of. I'd be happy to throw a couple of bucks around the world, organize this soft power that everybody talks about like they're all of a sudden a geopolitician. But not now. Right now, we need our own power, our own hard power to take care of America.
That shouldn't really be controversial, but
it shouldn't be.
But because of 60 years post-World War II and how we prosecuted the Cold War by not fighting directly with Russia was we funded anybody else. People have gotten used to that. And this is the disruption that needs to change. Look, the USSR isn't there. There are going to be conflicts out there. Are we ready to be the world's policeman for free? No.
Yeah, for free? I mean, come on. Here's one more thing I want to say that I'm just going to toss this out there. I am not feeling great about Putin. I'm not feeling great about Russia. I'm not feeling great about China. But that doesn't mean that we can't work with them, right? That doesn't mean that we can't talk to them, that we can't negotiate with them, that we can't eventually move toward a potential partnership or friendship with them. As a matter of fact, we may end up needing Russia again. Like we needed Russia once to win World War II. We may need them again if China becomes a trouble. I don't know who the next threat is, right? Like it's hard to tell. Like I don't have a crystal ball. I can't see the future. But it may be the case that we need to use one of them to play them off against each other, right? Like it may be a situation where, darn us. Well, if it's the French, we don't have to worry about it because I don't think they've ever won an encounter ever. Have you ever done that thing where you type in French military victory? Anyway, so yeah, I mean, like people are acting like online when I go online and like on my Facebook forums and stuff, they're like, hey, you're crazy for thinking Russia should ever be a friend or something. Like there was a time where they were. There's a time where they weren't. It could change again. You never know. Like you can't just be in this mindset where never will I ever be friends with this person ever again for as long as they live. Like,
right.
That's just
before the Bolsheviks, right? But we've had a long time and a lot of recent memory of the Bolsheviks, and we should be skeptical. But Russia's not the Bolsheviks anymore. But yeah,
right. Look, and if you're at that point where you're like, all right, I'm never going to be friends with them, then we ought to go to war with them. There's no reason not to. That's true. We might as well just go ahead and attack, right? Like if we're just never going to be their friend, we should wipe them off the face of the earth and never worry about it again. But I think that we can find peace. I think that there's a way to negotiate with Russia in a way that pulls them like toward the West, toward the Western way of thinking. I think that's possible.
We don't want to get in a land war in Asia, and we don't want to govern Russia. So, like we're wholly uninterested in that. We just want them to live in peace. If you're common men like us, we want peace. Don't be fooled by propaganda. There's things going on underneath that. See through it. Come here. We'll keep you informed.